In the mid-1980s, BMW tasked its Young Motorsport division with developing a touring car that would firmly stamp the German automaker's badge on Group A racing. But before BMW could take to the track, Group A homologation requirements mandated that at least 5,000 road-legal versions be produced within 1 year for the touring car status to be upheld. So, with racing at the forefront of their minds, BMW Motorsport began tailoring the existing E30 chassis to meet Group A specifications, and the result of their efforts is one of the most successful touring cars ever, the E30 M3. To say that the E30 M3 is legendary would be a massive understatement. Not only did this car begin the M3 lineage, but it is arguably one of the most important machines that BMW's motorsport division ever produced. Quite literally a race car for the streets, the E30 M3 opened people's eyes to what BMW was capable of before they slapped coffin-sized grills on the front of their cars. Sales of the first generation BMW M3 amounted to more than 17,970 units worldwide, and according to Hagerty, just over 5,000 of these performance-oriented 3 Series coupes made it to the US with price tags right around $35,000. When accounting for 30 years of inflation, that's a little over 70 grand in 2020. Even by today's standards, the box-fendered E30 M3 is beautiful and timeless. Considering the unique design direction BMW seems to be heading, I think there are plenty of people that wish BMW would turn back the clock to the days when sleek and understated styling were a cornerstone of their design language. Luckily, there are still clean examples of the E30 M3 on the road today. However, it looks to me like the 2.3-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine producing 192 horsepower and 170 pound-feet of torque is nearing the point where it can only be enjoyed by collectors, especially for low mileage examples, unless of course you're willing to take on an extensive restoration project. I say all of this because I've analyzed every E30 M3 sale on the automotive auction site Bring a Trailer, and I want to share the results. So let's get into it.
Alright, so after analyzing every E30 M3 sale on Bring a Trailer, the first sale in my dataset dates back to July 2014, which gives us a little over 6 years of history to work with. In that time, Bring a Trailer has hosted a total of 145 E30 M3 auctions, with 79% of those auctions resulting in a sale. What I found kind of interesting was that 9 of those sales did not include a drivable vehicle, with these auctions featuring pieces of original drivetrain components like the S14 engine and 5-speed gearbox, while 2 sellers offloaded their non-running project cars. Maybe this observation is commonplace with older classics, as these aging legends make restoration projects more attractive and arguably better value, but for the purposes of this video, we will focus on the 106 sales of fully functioning E30 M3s. The cheapest M3 was a 175,000-mile 1989 track build draped in Zinnuberut, which is just a fancy German word for this particular shade of red, that sold for a mere $13,750 in September 2016. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the most expensive M3 was an immaculate 1988 model year that was also finished in this fancy German red, but featured the Natura tan leather interior and had only 8,000 miles on the clock in its 32-year existence. Some quick math will show that that's exactly 250 miles per year, but what's even more mind-blowing than the mileage is the price tag that this car sold for. $250,000. That's honestly incredible and speaks volumes about the reputation that this car maintains after all these years, even with the 6th generation of the M3 on the way. But it's pretty easy to see that this particular car is a significant outlier. With that said, there were 3 other sales that broke into 6-figure territory, with 2 of the 3 following only a couple of months behind the $250,000 M3. Since these sales are so recent at the time of this video, it's hard to definitively say whether or not $100K will be the starting price for the cleanest, low-mileage E30 M3s, but what I can say is that the average sale prices on Bring a Trailer have been increasing year over year since about 2016. We'll take a look at that data here in a second, but before we do, you need to know that the average M3 in my dataset sold for $47,094.18, with a little over 130,000 miles on the clock, while the median car rang in around $40,500. As I alluded to earlier, 2020 has proven to be the best year yet for E30 M3's auction on Bring a Trailer, with 27 cars sold so far for an average price of $63,304. That's an increase of almost 107% over the 2016 average of $30,647. But it's fair to say that 2020's average is inflated by that 8,000 mile outlier we already talked about. So when you ignore the $250,000 M3 sold earlier this year, the average sale price in 2020 drops almost 11.5% to $56,123.38, while the overall average drops nearly $2,000 to right around the $45,000 mark. Still, those are pretty impressive numbers, and either way you look at the data, it's clear that these cars are appreciating, as evidenced by the exponential best fit trend line. Anyway, that's enough of that. Let's talk color. The most common exterior color sold in our dataset was the famous Alpine White at 29 units for an average price of $51,811. The second most common was Diamond Black, which sold 22 units for an average price just north of $42,000. The most expensive color was Salmon Silver, which sold 9 units for an average price of $57,253.44, although average mileage seems to have influenced this ranking when compared to second place Alpine White. Moving to the interior, 52% of the cars sold in our dataset were fitted with black leather and averaged right around $45,000. Another interesting observation here is that 3 of the top 4 highest average sale prices were M3s fitted with cloth interior, most notable being the first and third positions, which are occupied by vehicles that were built for the Japanese market and were recently imported to the US. For the US spec'd cars, the data suggests that the Natua tan leather is the most desirable, selling for an average price of nearly $62,500 from 16 auctions. The pearl beige leather occupies the bottom spot for OEM interior options at just under $34,300. Next, we're talking mileage. Without digging too much into the weeds, the best fit trend line exhibits a negative logarithmic relationship, and you can see how the cars with lower miles are going to be considerably more expensive than cars at the upper end of the mileage spectrum. This is especially important due to the low production numbers and the fact that even the youngest E30s are nearly as old as their chassis code suggests. Following the trend line, cars with 50,000 miles average around the $75,000 mark, and M3s with 100,000 miles average slightly above $50,000. Obviously, there are cars above and below the trend line depending on the specs and, more importantly, condition, but it still helps to see how mileage affects the price of the E30, and that even an M3 with over 250,000 miles driven could still sell for $42,500 in November 2017. Although this particular car did have a ton of work done and was wrapped in an awesome livery that pays homage to the Warsteiner DTM car. Last is the model year and condition of the car. For our data set, nearly half of the vehicles sold were the 1988 model year and averaged almost $48,500. If you ignore the 1987 model year that was imported from Japan, you can tell that there's not a lot of separation between average sale prices here from year to year. I would even argue that the model year has negligible influence on the E30's value since mileage and overall condition are so critical for these cars. And this assertion agrees with the valuation tool available on Hagerty's website. With that said, I'm going to leverage Hagerty's expertise even further as we look at the 4 overarching conditions that influence the E30's value. The top of the line, about as close to perfect as you can get cars, are classified as concours. For the E30 M3, Hagerty values these cars at $156,000. And I thought the values for the E46 were getting kind of crazy. Anyway, since the concours cars are few and far between, the second category covers the cars that could win a show despite having a few extremely minor imperfections. For the E30, these cars are valued at just under $100,000. Hagerty classifies the next group of vehicles as good and encompasses the cars that may have had paintwork done but are still mechanically sound. These cars represent the average E30 M3 and aren't too far off from the average sale price in our dataset. The last category accounts for the cars in fair condition. These cars have evident visual flaws and probably need a lot of restoration work, with values ringing in at $33,500. Just like we saw in the Bring a Trailer data, this is an enormous price range. But as was the case with the E36 and E46 M3s, these cars are only worth what someone is willing to pay for them, which according to everything we've looked at so far is apparently a lot of money.
After looking at the numbers, it's clear that time has treated this car well. For the cleanest examples, the E30 M3 takes you on a trip back to simpler times when the 5-speed manual was standard and your most difficult decision was likely what color combo you preferred. On top of that, there are hardly any gadgets to distract you from your duties behind the wheel, although cruise control with powered windows and a powered sunroof might make the E30 seem more domesticated than it really is. After all, it is essentially a race car. The hand-built convertible was not available in the US, and neither were the 7 special edition M3s. But the American market remains healthy despite these facts. Values are on an upward trajectory and really have no reason to slow down, with BMW recently showing us what the future holds. As is the case with the 2nd and 3rd generation M3, dealers around the country have picked up on this trend and are advertising incredible asking prices for the E30. From my perspective, the E30 has reached collector status and is perfect for someone with some disposable income who wants a sleek weekend ride to turn heads at car meets without being over the top. You're certainly not going to daily drive this car, but that doesn't mean that it should never leave the garage. Personally, I think a restoration project would be awesome. And if I had to choose my dream E30 spec, I'd go for a higher mileage, well taken care of M3 with the legendary Alpine White on black leather. Although in all honesty, I probably wouldn't be that picky. Anyway, that's all I've got, so let me know what you think of the E30 in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.